Oh, we didn't get our intro, Jason. The
I
one
was
thing
saying-
got a Slack notification and it covered the button at 0.01 seconds. So thank God.
Okay, but
Okay,
Jason and I
we
were
can
both
start over
ready
again.
for that. Like,
I'm still gonna play it.
well, now the show can start.
Classic.
know
And we are not live.
Yeah, I just want to say, Hump Day, like classic Hump Day. You remember those ads with was it like a camel walking around the office or something?
Man, we were doing so many throwbacks. I can't believe you brought the hump day. I was
Hump
actually
Day?
thinking we're not live because what does South Park say? Blame Canada. We can blame Corey. This is why
Yeah.
we're not live on a Friday. But
Yeah,
we had to
we're actually
pre-record
recording
this
on-
episode.
Yeah, pre-recorded on Wednesday, January 18th. My apologies to the Booty crew who shows up for the live session. I am unfortunately traveling and will not be able to record on Friday. So, but we wanted to create that episode. We wanted to, the glory of the full live episode won't be there. We won't get that wonderful nourishment of the comment section distracting you and distracting me, but we'll see if we can see, we'll push it through. But before we get started, despite the fact this isn't live, it's still not financial advice. We're just two dudes chatting it up, chopping it up today on a Wednesday. Definitely don't want to get your financial advice from us. But this is the Pirates of Finance. This is the show a little bit about everything and mostly about nothing. Maybe we'll talk markets. Maybe we'll talk economics, maybe business, maybe nothing at all. I mean, before we cut in, we were talking about murder, Jason.
Yeah, no, we're going full left field. So you want to start talking about a murder diary. By the way, whenever I hear murder, all I think is murder dirter. Was that like SNL skit about Mayor of Easttown, like the Philly area, the Delco thing,
Yeah.
murder dirter, with that great Philly accents. I happen to be in Philly right now, which is great. But no, you have this timeline. Is this a new thing or is this an old thing or where did you find this? And I told you to wait and save it.
This just came out today. So I started to read it to you, but we're going to get your real authentic reaction. This is like a reaction video. Make sure we clip this. This is I think this is the rage with the kids. Okay, look. There was a murder. Let's just start with that is atrocious. That's horrible. We don't want to make light of the situation. But what was discovered was the murderers or alleged murderers. I don't think he's actually been found guilty yet. Alleged murderers Google search terms on his computer. So I want to read these to you as well as the timeline. December 27th. Search. What's the best state to divorce for a man? January 1st. Just a couple days later. 4:55 a.m. How long before a body starts to smell? 4:58 a.m. How to stop a body from decomposing? 5:20 a.m. How to embalm a body? 5:47 a.m. 10 ways to dispose of a dead body if you really need to. I like that he added 10 ways, like as if there's going to be some BuzzFeed article about it.
Not the number one way. Give me 10 ways.
Yeah,
I want to pick my highlight.
I need the full spectrum. 6:25 a.m. How long for someone to be missing to inherit? Okay, he took a little detour on that one.
Jesus.
6:34 a.m. Can you throw away body parts? 9:29 a.m. What does formaldehyde do? 9:34 a.m. How long does DNA last? 9:59 a.m. Can identification be made on partial remains? Let's see. Here it gets a little blocked out. I think this is 10:34 a.m. Dismemberment and the best ways to dispose of a body. 10:44 a.m. How to clean blood from a wooden floor. 11:56 a.m. Luminol to detect blood. 1:08 p.m. What happens when you put body parts in ammonia? 1:21 p.m. Is it better to throw crime scene clothes away or wash them? All right, this continues. January 2nd, 12:45 p.m. Hacksaw best tool to dismember. 1:10 p.m. Can you be charged with murder without a body?
Oh
1:14 p.m. Can you identify a body with broken teeth? January 3rd, 1:02 p.m. What happens to hair on a dead body? I'm sorry. So first of all, this is insane. Second of all, are people not aware of that their Google search history is tied to them? Like, what? I mean, I get if you murder someone, maybe you're not in your right mind. Maybe you're not thinking this through logically. But talk about your evidence trail.
There's so many things on there. One, I assume it wasn't even on incognito mode, right? Like, I assume they could still find your incognito mode search history anyway. But like, and the second is, can you imagine if somebody publicly published your search history? Like, have you ever wondered about that? How bad would that be in general? Like, without context?
I mean, look, the whole thing is ridiculous. But the two that really stood out to me were the 10 best ways. Like I love that, like you think there's an article out there, right? Because there's the 10 best everything articles, like as if there's that article that exists, the 10 best ways to get rid of a body. And then I love the little detour of claiming inheritance from the missing person.
The other one got me was broken teeth too. Jesus Christ.
And then it got dark real quick.
And by the way, speaking of your search history, the comedian Bert Kreischer used to do a show called Open Tabs, where he would leave all his tabs open from the weekend while he was out on the road doing comedy, and then he would do a podcast and he'd go through like all his 40 open tabs. You want to talk about like just craziness? You imagine if everybody saw your open tabs. But are
you an open tab person?
No, I'm way too OCD for that.
Way too. You don't strike me as an open tab person.
You're not either, are you?
I think tabs are my best intentions. You know, I'm like, this is an article I want to read. And then but I'm a realist as well. And like, sort of, I'm going, I'm never going to read that article. And I just close it because I don't want it staring me in the face. So at any given time, let me check. I will tell you right now. I have 6 tabs open.
Yeah, it's about what I have too. Because of like this stuff and like, you know, our just schedules and stuff like that. Just basic stuff. But also the last one I want to know is, where did you find this? Like, because it wasn't
Twitter. Twitter's got all the best stuff. Twitter's got all the best stuff. I don't know why this was like hot in my feed today. I got a couple good things from Twitter today, actually. So there was some great memes around the Department of Justice. I don't know if you saw this. They like had this big announcement. It was like it was like the Department of Justice coming together, the FBI. They were going to announce this big thing at noon. And the big announcement was they took down this crypto exchange. I think it was a Russian crypto exchange that literally I've never heard of before. And everyone was like, oh, they clearly caught CZ from Binance. They're going to charge him with wire fraud. Nope, they shut down some exchange no one's ever heard of.
And to be clear, like you've heard of mostly, like, it's not like you're just crypto naive or don't know what's going on in crypto. Like we both probably been around at least 20 to 30 exchanges, and like, for one you've never heard of is definitely surprising.
So many exchanges. But Twitter is a just a fountain of random information during the day if it's well curated. Which makes me think of content, Jason. Let's see if we can segue this. Which makes me think of content ideas, right? I sourced an idea from Twitter. I was able to burn at least 5 minutes of time of our hour, so that's great. I'm doing a great job. But it makes me think of coming up with content and using content to grow business, whether it's media or whatever it is. You sent me a great video of Sam Parr giving a lecture. I'm blanking. I think it was at, wow, now I'm really blanking here.
I want to say it was at Craftworks, but I might be wrong about that.
Yeah, it was like an hour-long lecture about how when he used to run his newsletter, The Hustle, how he was able to come up with content ideas all the time. And I thought it was actually brilliant. So you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. I'm trying to think. So shout out to My First Million, a show that we both love, with Sam and Sean. And what was interesting too is, like you said, is Sam has this history of running The Hustle, and then actually Sean was, kind of copied some of his ideas, and he talks about this liberally with starting his Milk Road newsletter as well, and using his other buddies, and how, by the way, that newsletter is absolutely blown up and was an example of all the good best practices to do in setting up a newsletter. And they recently even sold a majority of it as well. But Sam got famous because he started the Hustle newsletter, as you said. But what he did is he gave a speech basically about all of the little tips, tricks, and hacks he used to create compelling content and viral content with the hustle. And it started from things that are like just so obvious but dead simple. I love the ideas that are like, oh my god, when I think of that, it's so obvious. And one of the ones he goes through is like, even just how do you put out, try to put out viral content on a daily basis. You have to have systems in place, and one of the systems they use is they use subreddits to source ideas. But he would go through, finding different subreddit niches, that have at least, a few 100,000 followers, to then going through, what are the top articles that week on that subreddit, but then also going through the comment, what are the most upvoted comments, or what are the most interesting comments that would lead to an interesting article, and using that for source material for creating content. And then he even went to break down like how, headlines are key. Obviously, you need that click-through rate, and how, it's almost like two different people. We've talked about this in the past, is like somebody that can write the content of the letter, and then sometimes you need to A/B test the headlines, or you need a great, copywriter to write phenomenal headlines. So it just goes into a lot of those details. There's probably 3 or 4 other main bullet points, but what did you take away from it?
Well, here's what I love the most. I think you sent this 2 or 3 days ago. I actually shared it with my team. I thought it was well worth at least the first half hour for anyone who cares about content. Cut to an hour ago, you and I are sending messages to each other saying, hey, do you have any ideas of what you want to talk about on the show? What did neither of us do? I don't know, go to a finance subreddit to look for ideas. Like, we are such unbelievable morons. It's like, hey, we both agree that this is an easy layup on how to come up with content ideas. Let's completely ignore it within 48 hours.
In our defense, I think it's a great way to come up when you have newsletter deadlines. It's a great way to come up with content. What we try to do here is try to talk about stuff that interests us, and it's hard to have like interesting on a schedule.
Yeah, I think it's not. I actually don't think it's just. Sam was talking about it with respect to newsletters, but I think given the importance of SEO, I think that if you run a business where internet marketing is important to you, and you have a blog and you're struggling to come up with blog ideas, you can come up with weekly blog ideas by, all right, you run some, I don't know, fitness related or diet related website. What should you be doing? Go to the fitness and diet related subreddits, see what they're talking about that week, see what's the upvoted comments and questions. Bam, there's your article. Write 500 to 1,000 words, right? And then submit it around. That might be maybe a little 2015 era growth hacky, but I think the reality is it's a great source for content. Speaking of 2015 related growth hacky era, I have an embarrassing admission about something I used to do. So this is admission time, confessions with Corey. So back in the day, I actually think Tyler will really like this. All right, Tyler, listen closely. Back in the day, the way LinkedIn knew whether someone checked your profile was there was like a very specific pixel that they would put. And that if that pixel loaded, it meant someone looked at your profile. And why did that matter? Well, if your profile was getting a lot of views, it meant that people were interested in you and they would push your content more to the top of feeds. Well, you could lift that pixel from your profile on LinkedIn and actually post it on your website and put it, if you knew how, you could embed it in your emails. So any marketing email I sent, or I put it in the HTML of my website, and this worked for like a year, it made me look like I was getting tens of thousands of views on my LinkedIn profile, every week. And it made me seem very popular for a while.
Well played, sir. Love it. Love that.
Did it help me at all? I don't think so.
Yeah,
but
well,
I was
that's
like
just the
a little
question.
nefarious hacker over here.
But there's something you said I just want to hit on, is like, because we're always talking about whether it's LinkedIn, YouTube Shorts, TikTok. We're always trying to figure out, the new ways or think about different marketing techniques or ideas. And you said, the growth hacky thing from the hustle, like almost like 2015 remind you of. But like, I would almost disagree in the sense that like email marketing always just keeps coming back, right? Because we always want to be off platform and have our own list. And I've actually been listening to a lot of interviews with Morning Brew. Was it Austin Reef, I think, that runs Morning Brew? And he's similar things. It's like just building that email list, whether it's through, daily, weekly newsletters, etc. Is like for all the hacks on the newest platforms, it always comes back to like building that email list. And then to almost to Sam's point, is always comes back to great copywriting. No matter what platform you're on, right? We have to break through the noise and get attention. And it's really about great copywriting. And it just reminded the example that just people don't watch the video. It's like he asked somebody from the audience, for example, what niche they're in, and they were like in dietary, right? So he looks up like the keto niche, right? And they go through the subreddit on keto. He's looking through a comment. Somebody writes a comment of almost like the sense that, what it all comes down to is electrolytes. The answer to every question is electrolytes for everybody's problems with keto diet, which, by the way, I've been through, and I can almost agree with that. I think 99% of the answers are electrolytes. But then he goes even deeper than that and finds somebody go, oh, great way to get electrolytes is pickles. And then he's like, oh, see, pickles is what's going to catch people's attention, not talking about electrolytes and keto.
By the way, that pickles thing, there's a whole community out there. When I do the annual March for the Fallen event, shout out to our buddy Wes Gray, who organizes and hosts that great event. They want to, at the trail markers every 2 miles, like at the service stations, when you're marching along and carrying this heavy weight, they offer pickles because someone along the way decided pickles were the best way to get electrolytes in your system. It must be some ultra marathoners that are absolutely insane, but neither here nor there. What it sort of got me on this, like when you sent that to me, it got me on a bit of a content kick, thinking about creating content for businesses and thinking about does the way you create content change when content is your asset? So I'm thinking about like the hustle, right? What people are subscribing to is the content, and then they're selling ads within that content. So they need that content to be good and they need it to be consistent. Versus the content is used as related marketing. So here I'm thinking about someone like, I mentioned this to you, Nick Bear, who runs Bear Performance Nutrition. He's a content creator, YouTuber, has been doing it for a decade, very consistent in creating content. And for him, it's like going to the gym is actually marketing because he sells performance supplements. So I'm sitting here trying to carve time out of my day to go to the gym, which has nothing to do with my business, right? Versus he can basically, like, everything gym related is a write-off. Oh, I need to go for a run. Well, I'm just going to record it, right? I need to go. And it's sort of fascinating to me that is, right, arguably, like, all that content creation is direct marketing for a product and in support of his product. Someone like Cody Ko, who you introduced me to, he has got a whole training vlog section. Like, arguably, it's just content for content. He's not selling any performance supplements in his training channel on YouTube, but it's advertising. So it's content for content. It makes me think about me and you, right? We create a lot of content. We can't really talk about product for regulatory reasons, right? It's like, what the hell are we doing? We're not selling ad space. And we're not talking about our products, right? It's not like someone here hearing me talk about murder for the first 5 minutes is like, that dude knows how to manage a portfolio.
Well, there's so many things that one is like you hit on every week. I always ask us right before we log on every time, like, what are we doing this for? Why do we do this? But the other thing is, and I was also thinking while you were talking is like at the same time is people like you go, what is this show about? The show's about nothing, right? And you're like, what does this have to do with finance? And I was actually thinking, you'd be shocked. Like probably half of my conversations with hedge fund managers are about marketing and content strategy these days. Like everybody wants an idea on what to do. And so you and I, try to think through these things. We throw spaghetti at the wall, all that stuff. And yes, we have all the regulatory things where we can't talk about, our specific products. But at the same time, I think if you look at like a Cody Ko that's much more of an entertainer versus a Nick Bear that has a supplement, it's interesting if you have a bottom of the funnel product, even if it's obtuse or tangential the way ours would be, that fuels the content growth. So there's a beautiful feedback loop, virtuous cycle that you get if you have a bottom of the funnel product, because then that bottom of the funnel product can afford for you to do more marketing and more content. And as you were pointing out to me, it's like Nick, and then most people don't know this, like Nick Bear has a team of 16 people.
That was, yeah. So this is where it took a weird turn. So he recently stepped down as CEO of his business. A woman that he met a year ago that was an entrepreneur I think she was an entrepreneur of a company called Mush that did overnight oats.
Oh yeah, those are great.
she understood the startup culture. She understood manufacturing. She understood product. Like if you took me, someone who's worked and run his own business, and put me into a CEO role over at a company that does manufacturing and fulfillment, I would be so lost, right? I would have no idea where to even begin. She's done all that. So she stepped in, met Nick, started collaborating. And a year later, he said, look, like for me to be CEO doesn't even make sense. Everything I do is about the creative and the marketing. And he's the face of the business, right? A lot of that creative and marketing is around him doing an Iron Man and recording all the training, and his 100th "What do I eat in a day" video that gets him 100,000 views, right? That's sort of quote unquote free advertising for all of his supplements, because he's showing 7 different supplements in each video that he's using throughout the day. Oh, here's my this and that I start the day off with, and here's my this supplement and that supplement. But what's it take to get that engine to run? Well, he mentioned they have 15 in-house media people, right? So they've got a YouTube channel, Instagram, podcast studio. They're actually building out in their new offices a kitchen so that they can do more food-related content, right? They've built out a gym that they are starting to add acoustic control to so that they can record more content in the gym with their athletes. Like everything is around content creation. And you and I think about this content creation problem. I mean, the amount of people you need to support, it is wild. Like when you really think about it, like, okay, if I were to spend a whole week recording my life, it would be so overwhelming to think about editing that, versus if I said, okay, I'm going to record myself and just keep tossing the footage to some pros. I mean, you know, the other guys who do this that you and I are both aware of is the Gray Market. Watch a show called The Gray Market on YouTube. They have in-house media people that spend their full time recording, making, and editing videos, and it's a real investment.
It isn't. It isn't. I really think about this a lot. And the other one, you and I try to reverse engineer what they do, as well as the Hormozis, Alex and Layla Hormozi. But they spend 60 to 70 grand a month on the team that runs that. But at the same time, here's what I'll say: it's expensive, and you have to build a team. At the same time, what I think Alex has pointed out too is like the difference between earned media and you know, paid advertising is, you know, if they get 2 million downloads on YouTube or across social media platforms that month, that they paid for the team to build out that product, they're actually not paying for that advertising on YouTube or the other social medias. So you're also getting that earned media a lot of times can be a lot cheaper. And what, as I always kind of hint at always is like, we're in the entertainment business. People buy from people, and you have to cut through the noise. And so that's part of, yes, we may not be able to talk about our products or anything, but people get to know us. And I've always talked about the risk involved in that, right? Like every week, you and I come here and talk for an hour without any prep. We usually do it live. We can just make idiots out of ourselves on a weekly basis. And so if you don't like the cut of our jib, then you're never going to buy our products. But what it does do is if you do like us, then you're more prone or likely to buy our products, or you at least get to know our personality types. And so, for example, in Napa Valley, when we have all these, $150 to $250 Cabernet Sauvignons, and most of them are nameless, faceless brands, they all think they're doing great during a risk on times, right? And as soon as risk off hits, they all have to discount their prices and everything. And all of a sudden, everybody has a question about value. But the people that actually put their name behind it, their family name behind it, they do a content strategy. Those people don't have the discount. They've created those relationships that get them through bad times because they put all that investment into the content strategy for people to get to know them a little bit better. And so that's the question to me is like, yes, it requires a lot of people. It just always, I think, shocking to us, and I think shocking to the general populace of like how much, people, time, effort, and cost goes into building this out to what looks like, let's say on Nick, like almost looks like he's shooting it all on his iPhone. And you're like, but you realize there's 16 people behind it, and you have to chop it up natively for each platform. And a lot of people miss that too. It's like, you can't just post all these things anymore. Each platform, you have to have native content. You have to really think through like your TikTok strategy versus your IG strategy versus your, YouTube short strategy. And that takes they have different specialists for each of those, basically, is what most of these teams eventually build out. By the way, where we did mess up, and shout out to Sam Parr for this one. This was brilliant. After he sold The Hustle, he said, I'm going to be a fitness influencer on Instagram. So like you just said with like Nick Bear, it's like now all your content is about you working out and getting jacked, right? And then all that stuff's a write-off, but more importantly, that's all you're doing every day is working out. I keep trying to pitch to you. I wanna go through like the David Goggins style Corey Hofstein boot camp, right? I should come to I should come to Florida for 100 days, and I just do the Corey Hofstein boot camp, and I just get my fat ass in shape, and that gives us content for 100 days straight, and we'd vlog all of it.
It would be the most boring content in the world. I'm not nearly intense enough or interesting enough to do the David Goggins boot camp. Yeah, so it goes back to that point of like, I think there's something really interesting when the content and the product so clearly align. I 100% agree. Controlling the platform and the audience is this huge hack around traditional advertising model. We talked about it in the past where celebrities, right? In the past, they were hired to represent brands. But if they have all the followers on the social media platforms, why shouldn't they own the brands themselves? They no longer, it's easy to compete when you're The Rock talking about your liquor brand. It's easy to compete with other major liquor houses. He probably has more followers than all the major liquor houses combined, right? He has more eyeballs, and that's hugely powerful when it comes to a direct-to-consumer product. So yeah, it's a fascinating new world. I'm always curious how it's going to evolve, but it always catches me off guard how much money is really spent here. And I guess the last thing I'll say on it is there's clearly people who increase their spending over time. Nick Bear, I'll go back to even Mr. Beast, right? These are people who have constantly reinvested in their business and this content strategy. Starting from, I'm just going to record in front of my computer all the time with really low quality. And then as soon as I can, I'm going to buy a better camera and I'm going to have my first editor. It's not like Nick went from no editors to 15 people on his team and a podcast studio. He did YouTube for a long time by himself. And then he, got some help. And then he started a podcast. And then he did, like, it's all sort of that snowball cumulative momentum that when you look at the end, you're like, wow, that's amazing. But I've also been watching this guy for 5 or 6 years. It takes time. And so, right, I think that's one of the things I always think about is like whenever I'm starting something new, I'm like, I'm so behind on some of this stuff. And yet in 5 years, I'll be pretty far ahead of someone who doesn't get started today.
Well, yeah, the good news is our industry is 10 years behind anyway. So even though you feel 5 years behind your average influencer, you're still 5 years ahead. And like you said, it's just putting in the reps right now. Interesting question for you. Have you ever bought any of Nick Bear supplements?
No, I don't think so.
But do you buy many supplements?
No. So I went through a supplements kick in my mid-20s when I was like, did probably a lot more gym than I do now. I would say that I'm also tend to be like, I want to research this stuff. And there's this great website called examine.com. Story behind it's pretty cool too. The person who founded it actually started in a subreddit, fitness subreddit, and was doing all this research of saying, okay, you're taking this supplement. Does it actually help you? Let's go to the studies. I'm going to grade all the studies. I'm going to find the peer-reviewed content. And you look at all this stuff and you start to like look at it and you're like, really the only supplements that seem to matter is, did you get enough protein in your diet? If you're not getting it enough naturally, then you need to take some protein. Creatine seems to help for men if you're not getting it enough naturally in your diet. And that's kind of it. It's like everything else, even like multivitamins, are just kind of a farce. So, a huge amount of these supplements, like I don't want to shit on Nick Bear here, but he wakes up in the morning and takes his strong greens and his strong reds and his fish oil. Actually, fish oil seems pretty well supported. Fish oil and his joint and bone health pill and his multivitamin. He does all that. And then he has his 3 different types of protein powder and then his pre-workout, his intra workout. He's got every supplement under the sun. When you do the research, I think the reality is most supplements don't matter. But you know what? We're all entertaining each other, Jason. He's pitching a lifestyle. If you feel better going to the gym, having his stuff versus the cheap, GNC brand whey protein, and it gets you to the gym, and because you love that lifestyle, you like that go one more, God bless you.
Well, the placebo effect is the best effect in medicine, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, that's
Absolutely.
what we're all trying to
Listen,
achieve. But
when I'm sitting on my ass, not working out, I feel a lot better about myself if I buy some protein supplements.
There you go. I wonder. There's a couple of things in there. One is like, did you ever read this stuff on creatine and like Alzheimer's and all that stuff too? Like, it's just like like you said, basically creatine's been around so long compared to a lot of other supplements, is why I think we have good data on it, and it's not as controversial as some of the other ones. But when you pointed out fish oil and vitamin D, those sorts of things, have you ever seen like more longer term studies and everything? Is like usually most of the studies on the first 30, 60, 90 days, and they usually have some pretty dramatic effects. And then it tends like the effects kind of fall apart or can quite frankly reverse, because now you're kicking off many other, complex cascade processes within the human body over time.
The human body is so poorly understood. My general approach is get everything I can in my diet. Like just try to eat it as was originally intended. And then I find if there's something that I need to supplement with, like I find it really hard to get enough protein in my diet for the amount of protein I want to consume. So I do take whey protein powder. But other stuff like I'll cycle. So creatine, fish oil. Like I don't want my body getting used to only getting it from a supplement. I actually think that that's not a good thing.
There's a couple other questions for you on that before we move on. One,
we've become a fitness.
No, yeah, that's why we're trying. Yeah, that's why I'm going to do the road to the Hoff, the 100 days. I mean, I'm gonna need like 1,000 days to honestly getting anything even within any realm of your shape. But the other one, I remember I read, it was like a lot of studies from like the 1800s or something, where the average person walked, I think it was like 10 miles back and forth to work and everything, and consumed upwards of like 5,000 calories. And it's just like, it just fucked me up, whether it's true or not, of like, are we just consuming enough? Like you're saying, consuming enough variety, consuming enough, but also people ate more seasoning back then too, and they didn't have quite the variety that we have now with all the fruits and vegetables and everything. And then, people want to debate on whether those are good for you as well, because of, all the either pesticides on them or the way. I mean, you just like, it goes down to, was it Carlin or another comedian is like, milk, good or bad? Right? Everybody just wants to argue these to death. But the other one I will point out that you brought up is like doing all the research on this stuff and like experimenting over the years and everything. I really do think that like probably the vast majority of it is like just getting adequate amounts of protein. Like if you want to really do body composition or recomposition, it's like that's the secret that the bodybuilders figured out. Just stuff yourself with protein, because the satiety levels alone are just so high that everybody's worried about like everything on the fringes. It's like just eat more protein. Whether and I'm not going to argue where you get that from, but like it's amazing how much that is like the number one thing.
Yeah, look, the body is an insanely complex system. The idea of like even just changing one little input, to your point, has such a cascading effect on a variety of things. It's really hard to just like isolate and say, if you do X, the result is Y. And the supplement industry would love to be able to say that stuff. But the reality is there's huge amounts of data on conflicting results, conflicting evidence. We have a basic understanding of calories in, calories out. But you want to know what? Even that's debated. Like it's wild to me that people debate that. Like and yet somehow it can be debated regarding body composition. People talk about your ancestry and what you are primed to eat and digest versus other ancestries. Does that matter? I don't know. Right? All I know is I just do what I sort of feel like works for me, and what I've sort of tried to evolve my diet towards over time. And I don't know. That's the best I'm going to get. I'm not going to over optimize this.
My favorite one was that I think it was amazing. Randy, he used to love like debunking things, and one of the things he would do right when he got on stage was take an entire pill jar of homeopathic sleeping pills or something like that, just to show like a whole lot of the homeopathic stuff was just nonsense. But like, there's a long traditions too. I think that's interesting about comedians trying to debunk other things, like other forms of like mysticism or homeopathic, cures or anything like that.
Yeah, I struggle with the homeopathic stuff, to be really honest. We're gonna take a really weird turn here, but I'm gonna talk about a book that I talked about this book for several years now. I think it's one of my favorite books ever, called The Secret to Our Success. Horrible title, great book, all about cultural evolution and how our edge as humans, like we are compared to animals, We don't have sharp teeth. We don't have sharp nails. We're weak. We have a lot of soft spots. We can't stay warm. Like, why are we top of the food chain? The argument is basically cultural evolution. We are able to pass down through cultural memory tons of things that give us an advantage, right? The things you learn by age 5, right? But a ton of that is cultural in a way that the original reason why is lost. So the example, a lot of it talks about is the way food is prepared in different cultures. And if you ask those cultures why the food is prepared that way, they might say something like, it wards away bad spirits or XYZ. And the reality is it was a cultural evolution, because if you ate the food any other way, it made you violently ill. And what they just learned is preparing it in a certain way, and then it was passed down hundreds of years with a cultural story as to why you had to stick to preparing it that way. But had not, like, the story has nothing to do with the real truth, which is any other preparation might kill you, and therefore you have to prepare it that way. So yeah, Go ahead.
I was gonna say, you probably read like all the Weston A. Price stuff about like fermenting foods and like different cultures, tribes around the world. It's always fascinating to me. And I was actually talking about it again the other night, is like trying all these fantastic restaurants where we're located at now, and it's like, you know, a lot of the best food and spice food in the world is because they had shit ingredients, right? Because the meat was borderline rancid, is why you had like the amazing spice trade and everything like that. Like all this like heat and spice and flavor that you get from a lot of the great cultural traditions around the world was because the quality of products sucks so bad. And so like there's little things like that. And like you said, it's a form of what we call Chesterton fences, right? If you don't know why a fence is there and you can't figure out why, you better keep it there, because somebody a long time ago put it there, and you may not be able to know why during your time frame.
And so to bring us back to your original point about homeopathy, it's like the reason might not be the actual reason, right? Like I understand, I'm more pro science, but I'm also in the field of people who go, if something's been passed down culturally, yes, I'm begging the question over here. If something is passed down culturally for centuries, maybe it's worth just asking the question of, is there anything underlying it? Even if the proposed reason is definitively wrong, is there some other benefit that the proposed reason is just sort of the smokescreen for?
Well, and semi-ironically, that's like the history of science, right? Is that you're constantly updating your thesis, and you're constantly updating your understanding. Like, you know, even you were talking about workouts earlier. It's like, you know, when we were growing up, it was more about like you're tearing the microfibers in the muscle, and then they rebuild themselves. And then now it's all about like hormonal cascades from lifting heavy and compound lifts. Like, it's just constantly changing over the time. But like you just said, the whole point is like, get your ass in the gym and lift heavy shit.
Right.
Like the reasons have changed, but the effect and the getting to the gym does not change over time.
Yeah.
And
all right, can I change the subject entirely?
Please.
I'm going to take us back to the world of Twitter, but we are going to talk about some finance related stuff here. Our guy, everyone's favorite, Cliff Asness, was back at it today, angry on the Twitter stream. So I need to rewind the clock to 2016, 2015. Rob Arnott, the founder of Research Affiliates, longtime sparring partner of Cliff, wrote a series of articles talking about how it was a bad time to invest in smart beta. So factor-based strategies. So value, momentum, quality. His argument was that all of them were overvalued, and based upon historical valuations versus forward returns, you didn't want to invest in these things when they're overvalued. I said, avoid. The only thing you should invest in, by the way, he said, was value. Value is the only one that was undervalued. Everything else was overvalued.
This is Rob speaking.
This is what Rob said.
What year was it again? Sorry, just so I'm up to
2016, I think.
Okay.
At the time, Cliff wrote a rebuttal and said, none of this makes sense. Momentum, for example, is a very high turnover strategy. Just because it's high value today doesn't mean it's going to be high value tomorrow. You can't use current valuations to project forward returns unless the holdings within the portfolio are stable. So maybe it's true for something like value, which has slower turnover. Maybe it's true for something like quality or defensive stocks. Definitely not for momentum. And he just sort of, there was a lot of points that Rob made that Cliff just said, none of this makes sense. And by the way, none of these are even at extremes. Your methodology doesn't make sense. Rob never addressed any of the criticisms. Cut to 7 years later, 6 years later, Rob is now on Barron's making the victory lap as of this morning, talking about how right he was. Diversified smart beta strategies did underperform the market. He was correct, but today you should be pouring your money into them because they're all undervalued. And Cliff was going off on Twitter today. By the way, the original Rob Arnott paper was called "How Can Smart Beta Go Horribly Wrong?" It was 2016. The key piece here, though, is that, again, as a reminder, Rob said the one factor that you should invest in was value. And if you look at which factor did the worst over the last 7 years, it was value. Rob shows this chart about he plots how these different factors did versus their valuation, and he points out this what's called the betting against beta factor, low vol stocks basically minus high vol stocks. Except he manipulates it in a way that it's no longer corrected for market bias. High beta stocks have higher beta than low beta stocks. So if you do a long short, you're net negative beta. Well, the market went up over the last 6 years. So of course that strategy had negative returns. AQR, when they created the factor, adjusted for that. If you actually use the correct version, guess what? It had positive returns. So Cliff is just going off on Twitter this morning, basically saying, here's Rob again, patting himself on the back for being 100% wrong. And I just love this for so many reasons. First of all, this has been going on for like a decade. There's this amazing presentation that lives on AQR's website from Cliff that it's when Rob invented, I'm using air quotes, invented the idea of fundamental indexing and refused to acknowledge that it was just value. He kept going around saying he invented something new, and Cliff was like, you didn't come up with anything new. This is just value investing. We've known about this forever. So that's from like 2005. They are still arguing against each other, except Rob doesn't even respond. Rob just says ridiculous shit. Cliff gets really mad, and then nothing happens. And it's like, I don't know. I feel like it's sort of like Lucy and with the football with Charlie Brown, like Cliff keeps coming and to kick it and he gets mad and he never connects. Rob just like doesn't give a shit. He's just a marketing machine.
Man, this ties back into what you're saying about content strategies. Maybe you and I should create like a decade-long beef with each other. We got to find some nemesis that we can go at for over a decade. And as you know, like Cliff and Taleb have had some epic battles too that we've talked about before. It's like, man, we got
decade-long battles.
We got to find some battles for us. But I was wondering, it's interesting. I wasn't following that on Twitter today or anything, but like actually one of the things I had for you, ironically, was that Cliff published the essay Uncorrelated Assets, an Important Dimension of an Optimal Portfolio, which was kind of rehashing of their old, more famous paper. What was it called? Hedge Funds Don't Hedge or something like that. But like, I was wondering if it was this in response to kind of this beef that was going back and forth. I mean, this is I think maybe published last week.
Yeah, that was independent. I think Cliff is just always having to respond to the criticism about hedge funds.
Okay.
He's been, he launched a hedge fund in the late 90s, a value hedge fund, dramatically underperformed the market out of the gate, almost made AQR collapse after they left Goldman. But I think their flagship hedge fund is called Delta. It's got a great track record from what I've seen. But, when you look at hedge fund indices, they carry a lot of equity beta and makes people question, are hedge funds really worth it? Cliff argues if hedge funds are done correctly, first of all, it's just a structure. That's all a hedge fund is. It's not like a strategy. But if you're actually implementing truly alternative investments, they are really valuable for a portfolio.
Well, this is what I find so interesting. And these are the questions I had for you, because like I've never followed these arguments because it's not the way I think about hedge funds. Like you said, we've talked about before, it's almost like an LLC. It's just a vehicle. And so when they are talking about hedge funds, these papers, it doesn't make any sense to me. So those are kind of my questions for you is like one of the things in the paper Cliff said again was factors, period, are, period, hedge, period, funds, period. Factors are hedge funds. And I've just never even thought about the hedge funds, at least in my world versus your world. Like, I don't think about them as having factor investing. But like you're saying, if it's long short equity funds, then yes, I guess they are factors. But like, that's not the way I think about hedge funds.
I'm gonna have to read the paper more closely where he says that, because I don't know why factors are hedge funds. Again, a hedge fund is a structure. You can put a factor in an ETF, you can put a factor in a mutual fund, you can put a factor in a UCITS, a closed-end fund, an SMA. Like, you don't need the hedge fund vehicle. So that's a little confusing to me, but I'd have to go back and reread the section.
So part of it too is like, that's what I'm saying is like, why I've never even gotten involved in these arguments is like, to me, it's always about equities, right? And it's always about, factors and equities. And I'm like, those aren't hedge funds, at least in the alternative world that I traffic in. Like, it just never made any sense to me. And one of the other ones is like, can you explain to me how long short equity funds are not just like 60% long beta? It's just like, that they basically, the P&L like decomposes down to a 60-40 portfolio. Like, I've just never understood this.
Why they don't, or why they do?
Well, they do. Like, if you look at any track record or I shouldn't say any track record, because it's the aggregate track records, and there's a problem when you aggregate anything. But it just looks like it's a less in beta. It's like it usually performs almost similarly to like a 60% long beta portfolio, even if you have the long short, because of the difficulty of shorting equities.
So there's sort of a couple answers here, in my opinion. I actually wrote a piece about this a couple of years ago. We called it Attack of the Clones, and I was replicating long short portfolio indices using major factors. And you see this major shift in the driving factors in the industry post 2008. Pre 2008, you had a huge amount of dispersion among factors, both in like growth, value, momentum, quality, defensive, but also regionally. So you had this long Europe emerging markets, short US, got very beta neutral. Post 2008, everyone seemed to make the switch into US growth. So it became like NASDAQ, basically, with a beta bias. And that beta bias sort of snuck in there, I think, largely because if you're market neutral, over time, people get pretty frustrated when the market keeps going up and you're not having that beta. So it's one of those where you say to people, all right, if you want the beta, I'll do the long short, and I'll just give you the beta for free. And then you can stop comparing me to the market. Right. So they start to cheat and add a little beta and juice their returns. I think part of it is so much of the industry has that performance chasing element that if you can hide a little beta in there when the market's going up, that's to your advantage against your peers when it comes to asset raising. So I think there's a couple of factors here. Definitely in the mutual fund side, I think you end up without market neutral implementations. You end up with more beta, because at least prior to this new 18F4 derivatives rule that made it more clear how much leverage you can use, it was a big question of like, how many turns of leverage can you have? And if you're running a multi-factor diversified long short book, you needed like 5 or 6 turns of leverage to actually get to an attractive vol level to be able to overcome the fees that were going to show up. And that just really wasn't feasible. So people ended up with lower leverage and sneaking some beta in there to try to use the beta to overcome the fees.
Yeah, and it's maybe my bias, because like I just don't think about stock picking as hedge funds, and then long short to me is like fancy stock picking. But I guess that, I mean, there's some very large hedge funds that's what they do. But like that's why like the whole long short universe is just out of my purview in general, and that's why
Again, I don't think of anything as a hedge fund, right? Like there's strategies and then there's vehicles, and whether you decide to put a long short in an SMA, an ETF, a mutual fund, or a hedge fund is largely dependent on which vehicle you think is most appropriate to maximize the implementation, right? As I mentioned, like a lot of interesting long shorts couldn't have been put in mutual funds until potentially recently. Probably would be tough to do in an ETF because of the way the market makers have to get involved. And so there is an argument like, okay, long short equities maybe belong in hedge funds and should always be in hedge funds. But again, I think strategy and vehicle are different things, and you want to make sure you marry them correctly. But they're different things. Like nothing is a hedge fund, in my opinion.
And then how do you How do you think about like factor models and everything? And once factors get published, or they basically get arbed away, whether you're using a Fama French 5-factor or 6-factor model and doing your overlays is like, in the last decade, like you're saying that, or what, since 2016, since Rob published the paper, not doing well is like, do you hold the faith and think they're going to come back? Or do you say, times have changed and the publishing of these factors, tends to get them arbed away?
I think there's 2 points here, right? There's what I would consider to be factors that are explanatory from a cross-sectional perspective, and I'll explain what that means. And then there's factors that also have alpha, right? So I would think of like sector exposure as being a factor. What do I mean by that? If you ask me, hey Corey, how do you think ExxonMobil did today? And the only piece of information I had was how did the energy sector do? I think that piece of information will give me some sort of insight into how ExxonMobil did. Even better, did ExxonMobil outperform, underperform the market? Well, how did energy do relative to the market, right? So energy versus the market is a risk factor that helps me explain the cross-section of returns, how stock A did versus stock B. But I don't think that energy, right, is necessarily going to have alpha. So it's a risk factor. I use it to model risk in the portfolio. So from that perspective, right, you can think of different ways of classifying stocks as being potentially important risk factors. Industry groupings are a natural classification, but characteristic groupings, right? Are all these companies cheap? Do they all have high recent returns like momentum? Do they have high quality factors can put them into baskets? And it turns out, at least empirically, those sort of baskets also help explain the cross-section of return. So if you tell me ExxonMobil is a value stock in the energy sector with high profitability, and you tell me how those factors do, it'll help me hone in on how I think Exxon did on a given day, week, or month based on those factors. Again, nothing to do with alpha yet. None of those factors necessarily have to outperform over the long run. Now, here's where things get sort of weird because markets are self-referential. Decades ago, people started to learn about these factors. They wanted to understand their factor exposure. Firms like Barra started to create portfolio optimizers that allowed you to build factor exposure into your portfolio. The more people who trade based upon that makes those baskets more permanent in their impact, right? If everyone builds their portfolio based around the value basket, growth and value, it means that that risk factor is going to stay important. So from a self-referential perspective, I absolutely think so long as factors remain popular, they remain important risk factors. Again, nothing to do with alpha. Then the question becomes, if I buy value stocks, do I think they will continue to outperform their growth peers, right? That one's really hard because, again, almost by definition, the more people who implement something, the more crowded it becomes. Everyone can't take the same side of the trade and harvest alpha, right, on a dollar-weighted basis. You need some losers. Who are the willing losers when everyone knows these are the winning trades? AQR has actually done a bunch of research into that. Antti Ilmanen wrote a paper, Who's on the Other Side, where he tries to look into that. I think personally what makes these trades viable, interestingly enough, Cliff Asness, not to keep bringing it back to Cliff, but he was on my podcast in 2020. I think it was 2020. This was when they were having a really tough run and value was dramatically underperforming. And he said something to the effect of, I really hope in 3 years, everyone is saying to me, wow, this was the most obvious trade in the world. Why didn't everyone stick with it? Right? And I think they've had a fantastic run ever since. I think the reality is behaviorally, people just struggle to stick with stuff that's underperforming. And when they sell out of stuff that's underperforming, they pass the eventual alpha that's there to those who have the wherewithal to stick with it. You know, the hands that'll hodl. So
go ahead. Sorry.
It's tough. You have to have faith. You have to have faith that the empirical analysis suggests that value is a compensated risk factor, that you will eventually get paid for it, but eventually can be 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And that's why Cliff advocates, and as with many others, that you should diversify to make that a more tolerable ride.
Man, you walked into this in so many ways. You have no idea. Like, well, I'll start with alpha. As you know, in general, like I think we need to clearly define what the terms are for alpha, and then underperforming. You know, I don't like benchmarking in general, and then alpha over what time horizon. But what you walked into is like, shout out to Flirting with Models podcast. This morning, I was on my way to get a coffee. I was listening to one of the highlights from your episode. And your guest on was talking about, you know, decomposing all the factors and using different manager returns and running factor overlays, and then figuring out after if they're not associated with any of the factors, that's where they're generating alpha. And I just started laughing, and I was like, if you're allegedly not associated with any factor, the idea that you produce any alpha at all should be incredibly dubious, especially over longer time horizons, right?
Well, hold on, because this goes exactly back to a conversation we had last week, right? Which is, what does an idiosyncratic manager do? So that clip was from a conversation I had with Omer Cedar, who runs a firm that helps discretionary managers, hedge fund managers, long, short, really equity managers understand their factor exposure. And the point I made last week is if you are a discretionary stock picker with a process, and that process can be systematized, you know, you can keep running that sort of philosophical loop till you get to the point where all that's left over for an discretionary manager is to make idiosyncratic decisions. By definition, their portfolio is going to be beta plus factor exposure plus idiosyncratic decisions. And those idiosyncratic decisions are, in theory, what is unexplained. Now, by the way, whether you want to have a lot of unexplained idiosyncratic return or not is preference. If you believe the manager's adding value, great. Another way to interpret that is you have no idea where the return's coming from. That might be a little scary, right?
And they're going to go through 1, 3, 5, 10-year cycle of overperforming and underperforming that factor benchmark. Yes. And there's no way of ever actually knowing what's actually producing that up.
Okay, but you've keyed me into something. I'm going to totally change the subject. I know we only have 3 minutes left, but I think we're going to go long because I wanted to get to this.
No, please.
You were listening to one of my things I'm trying, right? Which is taking old podcasts, and I'd be curious what you thought of the clip, not just that clip in particular, but the format. But two, I wanted to sort of do, maybe we'll do this next week, a little bit of fun of like, Jason, you know a ton about my business. Throw me aside. You get 6 months to run my company. What are you doing?
You don't want to do that. Come on, man.
I do. I think that would be exciting.
We're not doing that publicly, though.
Won't do it publicly. This is where we draw the line.
No, I just like,
or is this where we're gonna get into a fight and never recover?
Yeah, so I'm saying my general dickish comes across anyway, but then like that would just be like just me shitting all over. No, you run your business great. What are you talking about? Like, and that's what the point is. Like, as you know, I've always listened to every episode of Flirting with Models, and I love having the highlights. And I told you that, you know, I tried to be semi-objective when the first one came out. I was like, this is awesome. Like, it reminds me of a highlight of what one of the episodes was. Even though I've listened to it, it's always good to revisit those. It's like, you know, we're always, it's a weird thing in our business. Everybody's searching for the new information, the new, when there's only probably 10 things we need to ever learn. And they probably go all the way back to the Talmud. And we just need to keep reminding ourselves of those. So if you're putting out these high quality episodes, it's not necessarily, you know, quantity that you need to improve on, it's quality. So by revisiting those episodes and pulling out little nuggets that meant something to you, I think is generally the way to go instead of worrying about producing, you know, more and more podcasts.
Yeah, I still think I know you have some creative thoughts around my business. I've told you in the past things that I think you should do, that I think you're like, and again, we're not even talking about, like, I'm not critiquing ways you manage money or run portfolios. This is the business side of asset management, right? I'll throw this one out there. I've said this to you in the past. I think you have one of your unique edges as a business is you have managers you allocate to that are a tremendous source of content for you. There's a huge failure in the industry, I think, around education, particularly for vol managers, long vol or relative vol. And I think that you've done so many interviews that you could hire an editor, take those past interviews and turn it into an education series. I also think you could take the transcripts and edit them into a book. That could be either just a free PDF download or could actually be a semi-paid book. I think you could get your managers to contribute more comments to that book. I think there's a lot of ways to repurpose the content that could fill a really important hole in the industry, as well as be a massive lead magnet from a marketing perspective.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things in there. One is I think what it would come down to if we both did this is like, no shit, Sherlock. Like, we both know exactly what we could and should and need to be doing in our businesses. There's just only so much time in the day and resources, right? And that's honestly, it's a form inside your business of being a capital allocator, right? How do you allocate, human capital within your business? And so those are the things you and I are always working on. And then part of it too is we both know is like, and we've even had many conversations with our buddy Meb about it, is that education is the hardest piece in this business. How do you build up that education? Because most of us learn through osmosis and going down all these rabbit holes and just kind of bricolaging it all together. And nobody's put together a succinct education in investing. And that maybe, that's, if somebody can crack that nut, that's amazing. But like, once again, that's more than a full-time job, right? And that's a team of full-time jobs. Sorry, did you want to jump in there?
No, I actually we hit the hour. I want Tyler to come in because Tyler, I'm thinking about a next week's episode is 5 ideas for each other's businesses, and I'm gonna come like just swinging. And I need Tyler's input right now because I'm gonna propose that. What do you think, Tyler? You're on mute. This is the classic mistake.
So unprofessional. So
I love that. No, that's good. I hope it's like a battle. I hope you just smash.
I think it could get pretty ugly. Jason will tell me what I should do, and I'll tell him why it's a dumb idea. I'll tell him what he should do, and he'll tell me why I'm an idiot.
Kind of like your Ben Eifert conversation, where it's like, tell me why this is dumb.
Yeah. Why can't you do that? Oh, I can't do that because it's illegal, Jason.
And then speaking on education and checking subreddits for content, I was actually on financial independence while we were going through this. And I saw a few people on there who were asking, what's something that has surprised you in terms of your friends with a lack of financial literacy? And one of the top comments was, my friend bought a car some years ago for $70K. He paid the loan down to where he still owed like 25, and he decided to sell the car for 30 to get a new one. And today he thinks he made 5K. So tying that back into education, do you still have a ton of friends who suffer with financial illiteracy? And do you get that more because you're in the scene?
I have a tremendous number of friends who could not tell you what equity is. I mean, look, they just are in different professions. They're in, I've got friends who work in, who are doctors and nurses, and friends who work in construction. Like, they're not coming across this stuff. And where they are, it's often auto-allocated 401ks. It's like they get the QDIA, the default, which, protects the manager of the plan from a regulatory perspective. And so they just get shoved into these glide path solutions, and they have really no concept of what's happening. So yes, I think there's a huge amount of financial illiteracy around all of this stuff. And by the way, like, even as professionals, we don't always get this stuff right. Like I've got huge knowledge gaps around like taxes. Huge knowledge gaps around taxes, definitely. But all the creative ways in which financial planners can help you structure your estate and all that stuff, I don't even bother with. But here's like a really embarrassing admission. I've been running my company for 15 years. I make a 401k plan available to all my employees. I am not an employee. I didn't think I was eligible for a 401k, so I've been living my entire life without a 401k. No, I am. I've gone 15 years without contributing to a 401k because I didn't think I was eligible for one, and I am. So, right? I mean, it's just like we don't have all the knowledge. Sometimes even those of us who consider ourselves financially literate, it's too big a field.
Yeah, that's one of the biggest problems. Like you just said, it's education and where do you start, and then how does everything come together? And I almost was like Tyler's question is like financial literacy in what arena? Like in hopefully schools will get better at teaching like the basics financial literacy. But even when you use a car example, it's also different levels to this game. And blanket advice doesn't work. Like Corey and I as business owners can use tax write-offs and 6,000 pound rules and all these leasing versus buying versus miles we drive are very different factors on what kind of car we should buy, or if we should buy a car, what structure should we put it in. And we might not know the best. I was thinking, my brother-in-law was asking me the other day, we were talking about like money market funds, and I just like, we were talking about it a little bit, but I also said, look, man, this isn't my area of expertise. That's the other thing, is like this field is so broad. There's like, you don't necessarily basic financial intelligence stuff. Corey and I are probably not the best people to even come to for that. And that's maybe what Corey was saying about getting into our businesses is we would have different ideas for each of our businesses because we actually come from completely different sides of the space, and so they're not necessarily as correlated as one might think. And we're always kind of hinting that along here is like, we operate in two kind of completely different worlds in a way, even though they have a lot of crossover. So yeah, how do you even start, basic financial literacy education? And like Corey's saying, yeah, well, I have friends that like have no idea about a lot of stuff, but I don't want to have the hubris to say like I know like that I'm great at personal finance either.
Yeah. By the way, I don't know the first thing about saving someone's life or how to hammer two 2x4s together, so I'm not judging them.
Right. Exactly. There's something else in there though too. I just completely lost track of. But Tyler, any more heaters from you on that one? But that's a great question. It's like, how do you even?
Yeah. Also, I looked at the subreddit for pickles, has like 9,000 people in it. It's not even like pickling; it's just straight up pickles.
Look up the subreddit for pickleball if you really want to get the content going. You got to tie in pickleball.
I still haven't played. I'm
but also
hold out.
Tyler did give me an idea, and we should cut this because this is going to be our alpha generator. But the Fat Fire community on subreddit is where we should get a lot of ideas for talking about investing ideas.
People who retired with too much money.
Well,
how much of Fire do you think was just born out of the last decade of low interest rates driving up asset prices, allowing people to save and invest at a rate that far exceeded the historical norm?
Yeah, they're gonna find that out.
Yeah. I also feel like that's a good thing, though. No.
Well, it's a question of were you really just like pulling returns forward from the future, right? So the way I think of interest rates is when rates go up, you're pushing returns into the future, and when rates come down, you're pulling returns forward, right? So if you own a bond, very simple, 0 coupon bond, 30 years out, right? If rates go up, that bond loses value. And you lost that present value, but that's only because the equivalent replicable bond now has a higher interest rate. And so for them to be equivalent on a yield to maturity basis, your bond has to price lower so that the coupon on the lower price bond equals the higher yield of the new bond. Similarly, if rates go down, your bond has to go up so that the coupon versus your new price is equal to the lower yield on whatever new bonds are getting issued. It's just sort of an arbitrage market thing. But in effect, all you're doing is like, you're saying, I'm either getting the money today because the future coupons are effectively lower, or I'm losing money today because the future coupons are higher. You're just pushing and pulling money from the future. Now, that is true when it comes to stocks as well. It's very obvious with bonds, in my opinion, but stocks, if you think of them as the discount net present value of all future cash flows, well, if you can, and Jason's going to go, well, can you model those cash flows? Of fucking course you can't, Corey. But let's pretend you can. It's the same thing. They're just a bunch of 0 coupon bonds that you're pushing and pulling the cash flow forward. So in terms of how much did markets go up because we pulled a ton of future returns forward, and as rates go up, we're now pushing them back out into the future. It's a tough question.
And you did this to yourself, so we might as well go over seeing how this is recorded. So we're not doing live, so we have to provide more value. But there's so many nuances in there that you said were perfect, and the way thinking about interest rates and everything is actually our buddy Chris Macia of Moon Tower newsletter, which is fantastic. One of his most recent posts is about no arbitrage conditions, right? Like you're saying, if you think there's value there and you found this anomaly, usually you're not factoring in all the different parameters of that model, because usually there's always a no arbitrage condition that exists. And that's what you're saying about interest rates. And then at the same time, our other buddy Mike Green has his new Substack, which is Yes, I Give a Fig, I think is Mike's new Substack. The name of it.
Yeah, I think that's it.
But he was talking about too is like, why DCF models don't work too is because like you're not thinking about the embedded optionality during risk on times, right? You can buy other companies, you can pay down debt, you can go out and do more CapEx spending. But almost to your point, he's saying when interest rates rise, you're reducing the optionality, and people are much more worrying about servicing debt. And so it's like the DCF model will fluctuate with embedded optionality and whether you have it or not. And that's an interesting way of looking at it as well. But also the one I was going to bring up too from Mike's newsletter, that shout out to Booty Crew, Sean and I were texting about, is the idea that government currency, the US dollar, is more of an equity than like a zero coupon bond. And Mike and others have talked about this as well. I haven't spent as much time thinking about it, but there was one on my list to bring up with you today, is like, how do you think about that? Because if you can't default on your own debt, like if you're the US, US economy, the US dollar is like that, it's much more like an equity like instrument than a bond like instrument.
Yeah, currencies confuse me.
See, there you go.
That's my
personal
answer.
Finance education.
I find currencies to be the hardest thing to think about conceptually for some reason. What makes something a currency? As far as I can come up with, the only thing that makes something a currency is if you owe taxes in it. If your government demands payment in it, that's what gives it value. To call it equity or debt, it's all very weird. I'm not qualified to talk about monetary and fiscal policy like that.
Nor are you qualified to talk about personal finance like that. I mean, there's very few things. Well,
we're definitely
to talk about anything.
I mean, I'm qualified in certain areas, but whatever I say is definitely not advice. I should stress that. Maybe that's a great place to lead out. We'll use.
I thought that's what you're doing. Come on, man.
Yeah, transition out. Look, we hope you've enjoyed. We again appreciate you checking out the Pirates of Finance, the show that we do try to do live every Friday at 3 p.m. Eastern. This week a little pre-recorded because I'm going to be on the road 2 weeks from now. Maybe we'll do it live in I don't know. We'll do it live in Miami, Jason. Maybe we'll try. No promises.
Yeah, I was also thinking next Friday too. I'll already be in Miami too, so we got to figure out a solution then too. But I think I should be able to record it next Friday.
This will be a lot easier when I have a baby. I'll just be stuck at home, never traveling again. So yeah. Okay. Look, everyone, like and subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. We appreciate your time.